Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament, in the heart of the European Union. And in today's programme, we'll be discussing the issue of Jerusalem, particularly after President Trump's historic decision to recognise Jerusalem as Israel's capital back in December. In this programme, I'm joined by David Schwammenthal, who's the director of the Transatlantic Institute here in Brussels. Welcome to the programme. Tomas Sandell, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, and Hannu Takkula, who's a Finnish MP, and sadly this is your last programme today. But Tomas, I'll start off with you. You had a very successful conference in London, so can you share with our viewers about your successful conference and some of the diplomatic activities that you've been engaged in terms of Israel?
Yes, thank you, Simon, and it's good to be back on a program with Hannu. It's a sad occasion as well, but we'll get back to that later. Simon, I think the 6th of December will go down in history as a very significant day. You may even call it a D-Day, when something important happened in relation to Jerusalem. You mentioned the US recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And you know, this has been a key issue for the European Coalition for Israel for many, many years. We've made the case to say that Jerusalem should stay united. We made the case to say that Jerusalem should be recognized as the capital of the Jewish state. So obviously we have been very busy. It was a busy time before Christmas, after Christmas, in reaching out to those 193 nations at the UN, trying again to make the case to say why should Jerusalem be recognized, and also try to explain why it is important that Jerusalem remains under Israeli sovereignty, not because only of historical reasons, but also for very practical, pragmatic reasons for any minority. A city which is so contested, I think the Israelis have really proven the case that they are capable of managing such a difficult city. And so this has really been on the top of our agenda, reaching out to our friends, the diplomatic corps at the UN. And obviously there's a lot of work still to be done, but we will do our best to make sure that more nations than just Guatemala will follow the US decision.
Absolutely, very important work, thank you. And Hannu, firstly, on behalf of the European Report and on behalf of this programme, we want to thank you for being such a regular guest, almost 6 years on this programme. And we want to thank you for your brave and courageous stance on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people. And you'll be sadly missed here in this European Parliament. I'll certainly miss having you as a guest on the programme. So can you share with us and reflect on your time here in the European Parliament? What have been some of the highlights, and what does your new role as in the EU Court of Auditors mean, and what will that involve?
Okay, thank you, Simon. It's good to be here, and yeah, I'm also a bit sad that it's the last time, but anyway, I think that life is continuing. Might be in the future we can find some occasion to come together and to talk about. So I'm not going to go very far away. I go to Luxembourg, and the European Court of Auditors is still the EU institution. But what comes to highlights, I began as a member of the Parliament in 1995. I was first in the 10 years in the National Parliament and then 13 years here in the European Parliament. And I have to say that one big highlight for me is that about 10 years ago, with Tomas Sandell, we started this tradition of the Holocaust Memorial Day here in the Parliament. And you know, then after that, Mr. Martin Schulz, who was the president of the Parliament, take it that as a Parliament official event. And I think that that's something that, you know, I think also in the future, I remember that it was a very, very tiny little beginning when we started here, but you know, it becomes the important part of the EU calendar, and I think that that's something very important to also to remember in the future. And I think that's some something what was a little idea but grew up. Of course, then I have been the rapporteur of some big reports like the Europe for Citizens and so on. Then I can put my trademark. But when we talk about the politics alone, you can't achieve a lot. It's about the cooperation, and so it's not possible to accomplish anything alone. But I think that in many issues we have found good people for different directions, and what comes to issues concerning the Israel, we have had the little wins, and then also as a Finnish representative, I have to say that there's some little wins in the agriculture policy and also in the cohesion policy, and the last years I've been the European Parliament's standing rapporteur of the trade issues from Russia, Azerbaijan, Armenia and Georgia, and I think that also there is, especially in Georgia and Azerbaijan, some development has happened. So unfortunately the situation with Russia is still quite difficult, but I think that some good things we have done during the years, not only the bad things. And what is going to be when I'm going to go to the European Court of Auditors? So every member state has appointed one member of the court, and Finland and Finnish government nominate me as the Finnish representative, and I will start there 1st of March. And the work is about court deal with the EU budget, and of course the court does the auditing in the usual sense of the word, but it also monitors and evaluates. So we look after how the institutions and how the different programs use the EU money. Does the EU money goes the right directions and so on? And for example, during the years we have had some discussion in this program also that what about some money which goes to Middle East, is that using correctly? And because all this money what EU put, for example, to different kind of co-development programs, the money has to promote EU values, democracy, human rights, freedom, express and rule of law. And of course, we do that kind of monitoring, evaluating, and we are the independent body, even though there's an EU institute, independent body, we look after that, how the money is used. And might be later on, we can come back to that and discuss it, how the money is used.
Excellent. Well, congratulations for your new position, and you will be missed in this Parliament. And thank you for what you've done. And Tomas, do you want to say a glowing tribute to the work of your fellow Finn here, Hannu Takkula, and the courageous work he's done in working for Israel and defending Israel and the Jewish people, and also instituting with yourself the first Holocaust Memorial here in the European Parliament?
Well, you know, there won't be any other speaking turns after my long tribute, so I will make it brief. But it's obvious, and all the viewers of the program understand. They've seen Hannu from day one. I have a recollection in 2004 was the first time I met Hannu. I'd maybe heard about him. He was famous already then, but he was very humble, so I could walk up to him and explain who I was and what we were planning to do at that time to start this European coalition of Israel, for Israel. And he said very interestingly that, well, I have been thinking, should I run for office here in the European Parliament? And he said, the main reason for doing that would be to help people like yourself and to help the Jewish state. And I remember how touched I was at that moment that, you know, there were people out there who really had this so strongly on their heart. And later on, this was a Christian conference. We prayed for this Hannu Takkula, and everyone were so excited that there were the potential of having a friend of Israel in the European Parliament. And apparently someone up there was listening to our prayers, and the rest is history. But it's interesting that Hannu is mentioning, because today is Holocaust Remembrance Day here in the European Parliament, and how this idea started already in 2005. Just realizing that something was missing at the heart of the European Union. We should remember the victims of the Holocaust. This is the great idea of European cooperation to not repeat history. And to be able to take this initiative, and I remember so well, we were perhaps 30, 40 people, including the Israeli ambassador, and to see what we will witness in just a few hours, how this is an official event. I think Hannu can be proud of that achievement, and as ECI, it also illustrates a very good partnership with a member of European Parliament and civil society organizations such as ourselves. So thank you, Hannu, officially, and I'm sure we have more opportunities to thank you. So,
and Daniel, we go straight into today's topic. December the 6th was an historic day for Israel, for the Jewish people, that for the first time in Israel's modern history, the President of the United States recognized Israeli sovereignty over their capital, Jerusalem, and also as a gesture offered to move the US Embassy from its current location in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. What does this mean in terms of European foreign policy towards Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and how is Europe positioning itself now in light of this historic decision?
As we all know, there was great criticism from the EU about this decision, which was basically just a recognition of basic facts. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Every EU leader who comes to Israel and to visit and to meet Israeli leaders goes to Jerusalem. That's where the Knesset is, that's where the Prime Minister's office is. That's where all the government, or most of the government institutions is, the Supreme Court, etc. So it is remarkable how much outrage and coverage this very basic recognition of the truth has provoked. President Abbas is definitely trying to make the most of this division between the EU and the United States on this issue. He was here earlier this week and is pressing hard for the EU, or at least some member states, to recognize a Palestinian state. And that's very typical of him. Instead of doing the hard work, of doing the real institution building in Palestine, to create democratic institutions, the rule of law, a functioning economy, stopping incitement, stopping payments. About 7% of the Palestinian budget goes to payments to Palestinian terrorists and their families. So instead of doing all this, preparing a real Palestinian state and entering into negotiations finally, which he has refused for so many years, to get a real state, he's not interested in that. He's just interested in a state on paper, which he may get from one or other member state, and that will be his legacy, unfortunately.
And Hannu, as a true friend of Israel in this parliament, what's your reaction to President Trump's decision to recognise Jerusalem as Israel's capital? And can the case now be made here in the European Parliament and the EU institutions to at least recognise West Jerusalem as Israel's capital?
I think that we all know that this decision has made a long time ago, that it's based on the fact and the United Nations decision. But the US president, they postponed that, and okay, now Mr. Trump, president, decided, okay, not postponed it anymore, but now announced that. And I think that those people here who knows the history, they knows that, okay, that's right, that was the decision, and at that time when this decision made, there were no so-called Palestinian people, there were Transjordania, and the Transjordania's capital was Amman, and then Jerusalem and West Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. So I think that one very important thing is that try to tell the people once again what is the fact in the history, that people remember that, okay, what happened, the Balfour Declaration, and then San Remo, League of Nations, and all this, and the United Nations. And if they know that, then it's easy to understand that fact, that, okay, that's true, and the reason why the embassies mainly are in Tel Aviv and Herzliya it's because when Israel got the independence at that time, there were the situation in Jerusalem wasn't that stable because Jordania and Israel, they have tension there. So what we can do here, I think, just try to tell what is the truth and what is the history about that. But the problem is that this narrative, the narrative about the Palestinian state and Palestinian people, you know, it's so strong that people don't know the facts of the history, and I think that's the big challenge. And of course, we have to try to influence our ministers of foreign affairs because they have more power. Parliament itself don't have that much power in the foreign policy, but Minister of Foreign Affairs and then of course the High Representative Mogherini try to influence them and say that at least if they don't fully agree, that at least they can say that this historical fact that Western Jerusalem was and is the capital of the Israel, and of course, as we think, and as Trump rightly said, that of course it's so that united the Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. That's the historical fact, but just try to tell the facts for the people that they know.
Excellent. Tomas, we know the position of President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority. He's made his position very clear. This week he met with Mogherini and discussed the issue of Jerusalem. Now he's talking about suspending the Palestinian recognition of Israel as a state. Doesn't this really show his true colours, that he's not really wanting to engage in peace with Israel? And how does this now position Europe in light of the Palestinian Authority's position and that of Israel? Surely now Europe has to make a decision what side she's on.
You're absolutely right. We've said it so many times on this program that if the so-called Palestinian people, the Palestinian Arabs, would have wished to have a state, I mean, the facts are there. In 1947, they could have had a state already, a state which would most probably be much larger than what we are looking at today. And knowing history again, we know in 2000, the state was offered to Yasser Arafat, again in 2008. So there's been so many opportunities. And as I think it was Daniel who said that all the indications are showing that the Palestinians are not really preparing for coexistence. They're not really preparing their people to live in peace with the Jewish people and with the Jewish state. So. And this is also somewhere where we can engage with Hannu in the future and the European Court of Auditors, because we are making the case to say that Europe, coming back to your questions, we are not preparing the Palestinians for peace. We should be much more demanding on looking at the new curricula, for example, seeing that it is more radical than the previous one. If we are truly speaking about the future Palestinian state, if we are speaking about coexistence, we have to start preparing the people for such a future and not just encourage and fund incitement to violence and hatred. So there's a lot needs to happen before we can have a serious discussion about the Palestinian state. I've said it before and I say it again. I think the question should be, how can we make sure that the dignity of the Palestinian people are observed, that they can have better quality of life, that their human rights can be respected. I don't think this will be accomplished by giving them a failed state, a new totalitarian Islamic state. So if we really care about the Palestinian people, and I do, and I'm sure this goes for Daniel and Hannu as well, we should have a different perspective on what is really in their interest.
Absolutely. And Daniel, from the way I'm seeing things, you see things maybe a little bit differently, but I certainly want your insight on this. Isn't there a great danger now that the European Union, by siding very much with the Palestinian side and supporting Abbas, will not only isolate itself from the United States, which Europe needs the United States, whether they like Trump as president or not? The fact remains that it's in Europe's interest to align itself with the United States, but also that the European Commission will also isolate itself from what's happening in the region in the Middle East, with this new emerging alliance between Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states. So, do you think that Europe is looking at this in the wrong direction and not looking at its strategic interests in the region as actually missing a key factor that's going on in terms of these?
That this will not happen. I hope that Europe, and I'm pretty sure that EU leaders are aware that in the end of the day, whether they like this president or not, whether they have certain disagreements about policies, which are not new. There have been policy disagreements with the US on this issue and others before President Trump, that in the end of the day, there can only be any hope for progress in the Middle East and in other issues of international security when there is a strong transatlantic alliance.
Absolutely.
I don't think that anybody really believes here in Europe that they can go it alone, that they can stake out a separate Middle East policy in opposition to the United States. I don't really think people believe this. There is disagreement, for instance, on Jerusalem, but in the end of the day, there can only be a hope for progress here when the US and Europe work together. That President Abbas right now boycotts the United States is one of the most absurd stories I've ever heard. If the Palestinians want to make it really official that they are really no longer interested in a Palestinian state, they need to just continue this policy. But in the end of the day, I think in a few weeks or months, we will probably see a very interesting initiative from the United States. We are waiting for this. They are apparently working on something. And then it will be important that the EU and the US work closely on this and hopefully we'll back it and see if we can get the process back on its feet.
Yeah. Well, we're down to the last 2 minutes or so of the programme. So, Tomas, what's your perspective on what's going on, particularly because Abbas and the Palestinian Authority are wanting to drive that wedge between the EU and the United States? What position should the EU take regarding Jerusalem and also this demand and pressure from the Palestinian Authority, not only to recognise a unilateral Palestinian state, but now to recognise East Jerusalem as a future capital of a Palestinian state?
One can only wish, but we also know what the realities are. I think as an organization, European Coalition for Israel, we are pretty far from the very dogmatic standard of the EU to say that Jerusalem should be a shared capital. If we look at what does it mean to have a shared capital, we may even agree on that. But again and again, and I've heard off the records, I heard high EU officials agreeing with me on this to say, if we are really serious about European values, well, what are they? You know, respect for human life, for freedom of religion, you know, freedom of speech, so on and so forth. Let's look at the last 70 years. When Jerusalem was under moderate, very moderate Muslim rule, what was the case? What is the case today? What are the other options? And I think if we have a serious question about this, we may all come to the same conclusion, not because of historical validity, but just because of pragmatic reasons. And here I think we are right. And I think the EU should really be willing to reconsider, think outside of the box, and then we can see peace.
Okay. And Hannu, I just want to say thank you so much for all the work you've done on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people. Thank you for being my guest and Tomas's guest here on the European Report for 6 years. And I wish you every success with your future role in the European Court of Audit. So thank you.
Thank you. And I have to say that now, as a politician, 1.5 months, I'm still in the politics. I can say my opinion, but in the future role, I'm going to be the independent civil servant, and then my own opinions, it's not allowed. Then I have to follow the the facts, what we or our findings in the court. But anyway, thanks. It has been a pleasure to be part of this program.
And Daniel, Tomas, thank you so much for being my guests on today's European Report. I want to thank you for watching today's European Report here from the European Parliament in Brussels, where we discuss the issue of Jerusalem. And it's important that we stand with Jerusalem, as this is the eternal capital of the Jewish people. And we thank you for watching this program today.